Welcome to the We Are VIP podcast. Each week, your host, Casey Hasten, Director of Recruiting at VIP, will bring you valuable insights from thought leaders, introduce you to incredible companies, and bring you tips for landing your dream job from our team of executive recruiters at VIP. And now, Casey Hasten.
Welcome to the We Are VIP podcast, a podcast devoted to adding value to your career or candidate search, brought to you by VIP. I'm your host, Casey Hasten. I'm an executive recruiter, director of recruiting with VIP, and your all-around hiring guru. And I am super excited about our guest today. I can't even tell you how excited I am. Hopefully we're going to keep it within the time limit, but if we don't, I don't apologize. Just saying in advance. So today on the show, I'd like to welcome Captain Randy Norfleet, Usmc, retired. I hate to have to say that, but that's okay.
I am that old.
Yeah. So in June of 1992, Captain Norfleet reported to recruiting station, Oklahoma City, as Officer Selection Officer in Stillwater, Oklahoma. On April 19th, 1995, Captain Norfleet watched Timothy McVeigh park his Yellow Ryder truck in front of the Murrah Federal Building. After entering the Oklahoma City Federal Building, Captain Norfleet sustained life-threatening injuries from the blast of a 5,000-pound fertilizer bomb. He was a key witness that identified McVeigh as the person responsible for the bombing. In October of 1995, he was permanently medically retired for sustained injuries. Out of this experience, Randy became a motivational speaker, encouraging people to break through the bubble of fear. And that's what we're here to talk to you guys about today, because I know there's a lot of fear out there with the pandemic and with, the job searches, and maybe I'm not ever going to find a job. And Randy's going to give you some inspiration. So, Randy, welcome to the show.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you again.
It's been too long. I mean, it seems like just yesterday we were talking, and then we figured out, we're like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's been, 5-6 years? And so it just seems like yesterday.
Absolutely. So interesting. I always start the podcast letting people know how we get connected, because I think it's so important that you're always talking to people. So do you want to tell the story how we got connected?
Sure. Yeah, we were on an airplane flying to Chicago, and we got talking about this. It was a bumpy flight.
It was a bumpy flight.
You were scared, and so I started sharing my story about the Oklahoma City bombing and gave you some comfort. And so that was how we came to know each other.
And I think I remember going, if I grab you in the middle of a fight, I don't mean anything. I just get really super scared. I was so scared of flying. But I will tell you, that was the one flight that I didn't feel a thing. I was just so enwrapped with your story and so grateful that I had met you. And so many connections have come from that. I've met Donnie Stanton, your CEO, and his son and his family. I mean, I love it. That's why I tell people all the time, talk to everybody. I don't care where you are. You are going to benefit from the people that come in your bubble because they're there for a reason. Oh, I said bubble. We're talking about bubble affair today.
I know. We'll get there soon.
So thank you again for joining us today, Randy. So I don't know if we told you this or not, but we're going to be releasing this episode on the 26th anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, I've been engaged with Oklahoma City bombing since 95 and been a big part of that, and been, I tell my story because to remember the people that we lost there, right? Mm-hmm. Because who is there to speak for them if not for those of us that are left living? And so I'm more than happy to talk about my experience just so that I can remember my friends that I lost in that building.
Well, and I'm going to warn everybody, you might want to have some tissue handy. I have mine handy just because this is definitely a tearjerker. But so I would love for you to tell me a little bit about that experience and the fear that you experienced that day.
Sure. Well, at the time, I was living in Stillwater, Oklahoma. I was married with my wife. We had 2 kids, and my wife was 7 months pregnant. And I had been invited to a prayer breakfast in the Myriad Convention Center there in Oklahoma City. And so I went to it. And anyhow, after the breakfast was done, I was a captain in the Marine Corps at the time. I was a recruiting officer and, went to all the college campuses and recruiting there. And I thought, well, while I'm in Oklahoma City, why don't I go see my boss? So go see the commanding officer. He's there at the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. And since I wasn't there very often, I thought I'd get some FaceTime with my commanding officer.
Okay, so I just want to clarify. This was not your day-to-day office. This was...
No.
How often would you say that you went to this federal building?
I went maybe once a quarter.
Okay. Sorry.
Yes, so very infrequent. So this was an infrequent, impromptu visit. And so as I was driving up to the Oklahoma City building, for a lot of folks, they've never seen it. There's the memorial is there now. But as you come up to the west side of the memorial, there's a stoplight right before the memorial. And I was stopped at that stoplight. And so while I was there, I noticed this Yellow Ryder truck in front of the Oklahoma City Federal Building. And I thought it was a little bit unusual because, a lot of recruiters went in and out to get their orders. And anyhow, a guy jumped out with a camouflage bottom and T-shirt on. And I thought, well, how unsatisfactory is that for this military sergeant to be parking his truck in a loading zone, leaving it there, and then running across the street and away from the building? I thought, wow, that is just really strange. So by that time, the light changed, and I drove and I parked right in front of his Yellow Ryder truck, right? And so I thought it was my lucky day, right? Because I got a good parking spot. I was right there. I was going to be able to get in the building. I was going to be able to get out and get on with my day, right? And so, it's just interesting how life changes so quickly with us, right? And so anyhow, I walked behind my truck and I walked right in front of that Yellow Ryder truck and I went into the building and the elevators were open. I went up to the 6th floor and as I came into the Marine Corps recruiting office in Oklahoma City, I met a young man. His name was Sergeant Davis, and he had just applied to go to officer candidate school. And so the board had met the day before, and he wanted to know, this was before cell phones and the internet and all that stuff, right? And so he asked me to call Headquarters Marine Corps and see if he had been selected to go to officer candidate school. And so I sat down at the operations officer's desk, called Headquarters Marine Corps, and back then you had busy signals, right? There's no voicemail at the time. And so I got a busy signal, I hung the phone up, I looked across at the sergeant, and I said, I'll be back in 10 minutes. Let me go see the commanding officer. We'll call again, right? Because we all think we got more time than we have, right? Yeah. And so anyhow, I walked over to the next office to our supply sergeant, and I started talking to him. And about that time, as you guys know, as a lot of folks know about the Oklahoma City bombing, that gentleman I saw run out of the truck was Timothy McVeigh. And inside of that Yellow Ryder truck was a 5,000-pound bomb. And so at that time, the bomb went off. And what happened to me is I was sitting in front of a glass facade, the facade of the building, right? And so the blast of that created shrapnel, and I took a piece of shrapnel in my right eye, right? And just lodged and filleted open my right eye. And so then I was sitting about from me to you to the columns of the building. And so as that bomb went off, it decimated all the support structure of the building. And so the building started to collapse on each other. There's 9-story buildings. So 9-story went to the 8-story, went to the 7-story, went to the 6-story, where I was on the 6th story. And the impact of that threw me into the west wall of the building, face first into a concrete slab, right? And so it fractured my skull, right? And also at the time I didn't realize it, but I had cut the ulnar artery here on my left wrist with shrapnel. And so the shock of that, or hitting the concrete wall, it knocked me out. And so I was probably knocked out for half an hour, right? Well, anyhow, I came to, and one of the sergeants that I had been with, Sergeant Snydercourt, he started to help me up. And I was very disoriented because I was in shock. I'd lost a lot of blood because I cut an artery in my head. I cut the artery here in my arm, and I was bleeding out pretty quickly, right? So he had cleared off a desk, not too unsimilar to this desk here. He cleared it off, and he laid me on the desk. And as I was sitting there on that desk waiting for him to administer first aid, I realized that if I didn't get off of that table right now, that I'd die, right? Because you can just, in those kind of situations, you heard people talk about their life flashing before their eyes, and my life flashed before my eyes, and I knew that if I didn't get off of that table, that I would die. So I got up off of the table, and fortunately, by that time, the dust of the bombing had settled, and somebody had gone to the back of the building where the stairs were, and they had left this bright red oxygenated blood, right? And so as you can imagine, I had a piece of glass in my right eye, and I was in shock, and I had all of this blood coming down through my face. I could barely see. I was very fortunate that I didn't fall off the edge into the pit that had been created.
Yeah, 'cause the wall's gone, right?
Yeah, the wall's gone, everything's gone, I'm blind, and so all I see is this red blood trail, and I follow the blood trail back to the back of the building, and fortunately, all 6 flights of the stairs were intact. I was able to walk down all the way to the back, and I went out the back of the building, and I got into an ambulance, one of the first ambulances that was there, and they took me to the hospital. And so as I went into surgery, I made the nurse, because I was going into shock, right, because of the blood loss, I made the nurse write my wife's phone number on her arm, right?
Didn't you make her write it 3 times?
Yeah, and so I made it right. I made her write it 3 times, right? And so I was in surgery from about 9:30 that morning until about 5 o'clock that afternoon. And so after I had gotten out of surgery, the nurse went and called my wife, right? And so my wife at the same time, at 9 o'clock a.m., 9:02 a.m. when that happened, she had a friend who had called her and said, hey, you need to look and see what was happening at the Oklahoma City Federal Building. So, by that time they had helicopters on there, and they had on-scene live cameras, and she saw my truck. She knew I was going by there, and she
didn't know that part.
Right, yeah. So she had seen my truck, and it was completely blown apart, right, because of the bomb. I was right in front of the bomb, right? So she assumed I was dead. Right.
And she's 7 months pregnant. I want to bring that
And
back
she's
up.
7 months pregnant, yes. So my wife is 7 months pregnant. She's got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old at home, and she's 7 months pregnant. And so while I was gone, one of my candidates came to our house in his uniform, right? And my wife and I, we had been through combat before, and in pilots, it's not a safe business, right? And so she knew what it meant when a Marine walks up to your house. And so when she came, she said, she goes, Nick, you cannot come into the house. Because I don't believe my husband. She wasn't ready to accept it yet, right? And so anyhow, so she finally, Nick, my new second lieutenant, he convinced her he didn't know anything, so she let him in, right? But anyhow, her and her ladies from church were there at the house, and then this nurse calls her at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and says, hey, your husband is here, right? And so we've got him in surgery, or he's just gotten out of surgery. We don't know if he'll make it through the night, right? Because, I had lost so much blood, and I was in such critical...
Well, and let's talk about that real quick, because I don't think you expressed this in severity of that. You lost all your blood.
Well, when I checked in, my blood pressure was 50/0. So I was basically pumping all my blood out, and none was returning, right? And so I was very, very fortunate. So anyhow, my wife had a family member drive her down to Oklahoma City, and as she was driving, because the St. Anthony's is right there next to Oklahoma, the Federal Building, as she was driving by, she saw that they had, started laying out the babies that they had taken out of the building. And she had heard the mothers cry that, please find a sheet to put our babies on. Right? So anyhow, so she goes through that, and the impact of that throws her into labor, right? And so she gets to the hospital, and she sees the thousands of people that are there because they're holding signs and they're saying, have you seen my husband? Have you seen my daughter? Have you seen, and they had no hope, right? Because they didn't know. And fortunately for my wife, she knew where I was. So she goes into the hospital, and she goes to one of the nurses, and she says, hey, my husband is here. He's in ICU. I need to go see him. And so the nurse took a look at her and saw she was in labor. And she goes, hey, you're not going to go see your husband. You have to go to the maternity ward, and you have to go have baby. Right? And so I've always called my daughter my little bombing baby because this was my big day, right? It was my big day. Our dad was finally getting attention, right? And here my daughter, she's not even born yet. She's trying to steal all of my attention, right? So anyhow, so they sent her to maternity ward, and she was able to, they were able to stop the labor. My daughter was born at full term 2 months later. And anyhow, so then obviously my wife came to me, and obviously I survived because I got to meet you. And so that's basically the core of my story.
That is fear in the extreme. And I know every time you tell that story, you've told it so much, and it's even almost 26 years later, it's so real. It's so raw. Mm-hmm. And I appreciate you being so brave to share that message of hope with people today and
Sure.
bringing that alive. But, what would you say to people? So many people have that fear, especially the fear of the unknown, right?
Right.
How did you push through that? Because there were so many unknowns in what you went through.
That's right. Well, as we had not discussed, I was a pilot in the Marine Corps, and I had gone into the Marine Corps to become an American Airlines pilot, and that was my career, right? And so, so all of that was cast away, with being blind in my right eye. My career was gone, right? But as far as breaking out of the bubble, right, while I was laying on that table, right, bleeding out, I had a decision to make, right? I was afraid. I was afraid of losing my life. I was in shock from all of the things that had happened. And I had to make a decision to get off of that table, because if I had just laid on that table, I would have died where I laid, right? And so you have to find that courage within yourself, that determination within yourself to get up off of the table and to follow a trail. For me, it was a blood trail to the back of the building that led me to the next stage of my life, which is living after the bombing. And so that's what I had to do, is I had to break through that bubble of fear to save my life, right? But then as I continued to understand the ramifications of it, I was without a career. Everything, McVeigh took everything from me. Right? He took my eye. He took my career. He killed my friend, Sergeant Davis there. They found him 3 days later in the rubble, right? And so he took everything away from me. And so I had to find that touch point to find that motivation to go on, right? And so for me, it happened 2 months later. My daughter was born, and I had to make a decision. I had to say, well, am I going to wallow in my self-pity? Am I just going to become another victim, of my circumstances? Or am I going to get up and do something with my life? And that's what I did. And so now here we are 25 years later, and I am so thankful that I got up off of that table and that I had the desire and the motivation to make something of my life.
And not only make something, you have become very successful, with your second career, working in the aerospace industry, in sales. And I'm never quite sure what kind of sales you do. I think it has something to do with wiring.
Something. Engineering products.
Engineering products. Okay, we'll go with that. But your ability to overcome fear, absolutely impacted your life and that of your families. How can others apply these lessons to move forward, like in their careers?
Right. Well, when you get into that bubble of fear, right, sometimes it's disorienting, right? Because you don't know what's in the future. Mm-hmm. And so you're afraid just because you don't know, right? And so, I found the touch points within my own life to give me motivation. But then I also access my families and friends to help give me direction and to help me not only know that I'm not alone, right, but to get their perspectives on how I could reshape my life, right? Because, like I said, I was wanting to be a pilot, and now that was not there, right? I had to completely rethink my life in what I wanted to be, and I had to recreate myself after that devastating loss. And so, having to me, I've always thought that flexibility is the key to life, right? Flexibility in our emotions, flexibility in our mind, flexibility in our body, so that we can adjust to all the changes that come into life, right? And so to me, I think, being able to break out of that bubble of fear is having the flexibility to accept new ideas.
I love how you just said that, accept new ideas and breaking through that bubble of fear, because, one of the things that I've learned over the past couple of years is that your awareness impacts how you perceive things, right?
Yes.
And so it would have been real easy for you to sit back and go, oh, woe is me, the world's against me, Timothy McVeigh's against me, and just kind of crumbled. And nobody would have blamed you, right?
Yeah.
But instead, you looked at that with a champion mentality and a champion perspective and said, I'm going to make something of this.
That's right. Because, if you go back and look at disasters and stuff like that, and it's not just Oklahoma City bombing, but other disasters, mm-hmm. that a lot of first responders that will come and see that tragedy, don't have a way to deal with it, and
right.
and they do harmful things to themselves because they don't know how to deal with that, right? And victims too. Victims can get stuck in their victimhood, yep. right? Because it brings them notoriety or attention or whatever. But if you stay in that victimhood, if you stay in that fear, then you are never going to realize the potential that you have in yourself. And you kind of have to just figure out how to put that behind you and move forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is so good. And you mentioned earlier, and I want to kind of go back to that, how important your network was, your network of supporters. What did that mean to you? How did they help you?
Well, when that bombing happened, not only did I have my family, but I had my Marine Corps family too, mm-hmm. right? And so I had a lot of support. And how I got my next step was one of my friends said, "Hey, Randy, I know of a job in Dallas, and it's kind of what you're looking for." And so he got me hired on in Dallas selling test equipment, and in 1995, and here I am in 2001, still selling test equipment in Dallas.
So right? Was that with the same company?
Oh no, I had changed companies,
oh, okay.
And there's been a lot of not career changes, but company changes,
right?
And so those friends brought me into a new career, and they gave me that example that I could get on with something else. And
that is huge.
And so it was just a friend of mine who gave me a recommendation, and so that's how that happened.
That is awesome, and not in any way to detract from you, but I kind of had not similar. Okay, that was not a good choice of words. I had an experience where, I had a change of careers, but not mm-hmm. because of something so dramatic, but just because I was so burnt out on my old career. Mm-hmm. And had it not been the support of my loved ones saying, you can do that.
That's right.
You've got a safety net. We've got you if you fall. Go try it. See if you like it. I would have never switched to recruiting, which is my absolute passion.
Yeah, well, you've done so well with it.
Because I love people. So how can we be the support that people need?
Well, they say a true friend is one that rejoices with your wins and cries with you in your sorrows, right? And so to be that friend, you have to place their interest above yours, which is love, right? And so you have to love your friend by placing their interest above yours and cry with them in their sorrows and rejoice with them in their wins. Because you think about how many fake friends we have that when you tell them something good, they're, oh, well, I did something, or, that's not that big of a deal, right? Because that intimidates them, right? And so you need to find those true friends that are looking out for your best interest.
And I think that is so true. I mean, I think it's Jim Rohn who says, you're the average of the 5 people you surround yourself with.
That's right.
And if you're surrounding yourself with those people that are negative and always bringing you down, there's no way you can lift yourself up. But if you surround yourself with those people that build you up, that are slightly better than you, even more than better than you, then you're always going to be growing and learning and discovering something new. And that's the kind of support I have around me. And I love that. And it is so critical to my success. And I just can't encourage everybody enough to do the same thing. So what final piece of advice can you share with our listeners, that may be struggling with some fears?
Well, I would say that, you've got to find that courage within yourself, right? And that you can achieve more than you realize, right? And I realized that, for me, my first lesson of that was in the Marine Corps, right? Is that when you have a drill instructor yelling at you and he is not your BFF, right? And you realize that you're going to have to perform above whatever you have done before. And so you need to have those, drill instructors or circumstances in your life to help you achieve more than you thought possible. And so I would encourage you to keep an open mind that you can achieve more than you realize.
I love that. And I just personally, from the bottom of my heart, want to thank you for being so generous with your time on that first original flight with me, and just being so open and so caring and so everything. I swear I was not going to cry on this, but it meant the world to me. And I know that from that has come a deep friendship, and that I just thank you so much for everything that you're doing for the world and trying to overcome that and help people break through that bubble of fear, but just not letting Timothy McVeigh win. Thank you. So, all right. With that, let's get to our VIP questions. We're going to lighten this up just a little bit.
A little bit.
Just a little bit.
A little bit.
Okay. If you were chosen to be one of the first colonists on Mars, what 3 things or people would you take with you?
Well, I think I would take my wife, right?
You have to take your wife. I've seen you two together.
And because she's been through the good times and the bad times, and I would say she's been up and down and all around with me, right? So,
and she still smiles. I'm going to say
right.
that. She still smiles.
That's right. And so I would take her, because probably a one-way trip, right? And so, her and I would have our last big adventure together.
I love it. You get 2 more things.
I do. Well, what are they?
I don't know.
Oh, 2 more people. Well, I don't. That's all.
You just want your wife. That's beautiful.
That's
I love that.
That's right.
I love that.
I don't need anything else other than, I wouldn't want to take my kids with me, because they're starting to get married and have grandkids, or grandkids for me. And so, I would want them to watch me.
And what a beautiful thing you just said. You're about to have grandkids.
Well, I have 2 already. I need couple more. So.
That's awesome. So what's one thing you do each morning to set your day up for success?
Well, for me, the most important things is well rested, well caffeinated, and have a grateful spirit, right? Because, it was very funny. I've been talking to some friends today that have, had some tragedies in their lives, and you have to be grateful for the time that we're given and the things that we're given. And so if you have for me, if you have a grateful heart, then you're able to become that friend that everybody needs, right? And then you can see the beauty in someone else and the strength in someone else. And when you can bond with that, then you can have a good relationship like you and I've had through the years, right? Because we were able to share, our tragedies together and come together in that.
Absolutely. And and I just want to add to that, and I think that's beautiful that you do that, because I start my day with gratitude as well. And it's really hard to have a bad day when you start off with gratitude.
That's right.
So I love it. All right, my final VIP question. Dun, dun, dun.
I hope I pass.
I hope you do too. So if your life story was being summarized in a news article, what would the headline be?
Well, I think I already kind of answered that question. It'd be up and down and all around, because, I a lot of times I feel like I've been Forrest Gump, right? In that, I was in Desert Storm and part of the national story there, and, had the fame and accolades of combat and the pilot and that kind of thing. And then I was in the Oklahoma City bombing, and that gave me a national spotlight there. And so, those were all up and down. And, and then as you deal with the, and then my business has been a success, and so that's been an up, and business has not been good, and that's been a down, right? And so I'm just very grateful that my wife has been with me in the ups and the downs and all around and everything in between.
I love it. So, and I also want to point out to people that you've got a couple of memorials, right? Like your wings and stuff are on display. Where's that at?
Yeah, so this short story that I told you about Oklahoma City bombing is at the National Museum in the Marine Corps in Quantico, Virginia, and there they had my medals and my pilot naval aviator wings that I had there. They were all blood soaked because I'd bled all over them, and so I donated those to the museum in Quantico. And then my story and name are in the memorial, Oklahoma City National Memorial, and there. And then, we've had several, PBS did a documentary on Oklahoma City, and then there was another one, 0 Hour. And then I've been in a lot of publications, in written publications and stories like that, Reader's Digest and stuff.
Yeah, I'm not sure which documentary I watched on you. But I think it was the PBS one that was really, really good. It was very thorough about the whole thing. So I would highly recommend that people take an opportunity to go watch that, because, this is part of our history. And what, Randy's done for us has been amazing. And we need to honor that. So this has been incredible. I'm so glad we finally made this happen. How do people find you?
You can email me, randy.norfleet@gmail.com.
Oh, that's easy. Are you very active on LinkedIn? Is that another way to find
I am,
you?
yes. I'm on LinkedIn too. Certainly, I'm an open networker. So please reach out and touch me and let's connect.
Yeah. And hey, when you do reach out to him on LinkedIn, just send him a quick note, say that you saw him on VIP. We are VIP. And I bet you he's going to respond pretty quickly to you. So,
well, thank you so much, Casey. This has been such a wonderful time.
It has been my pleasure. And I just have one last thing to say to you.
Sure.
You are a VIP.
Oh, well, thank you.
And that's a wrap for today. Join us next week here on the We Are VIP podcast. We'd love to know how we can help you be a VIP. To find out more, log on to wearevip.com.